L34, R16, L8. L34, R16, L8. Those words ran through my mind repeatedly as I tried to figure out what it was. I had never heard about it before, but one thing was certain. It was a code to a lock, or maybe a combination to a safe. If it was, though, then what was inside this safe, and why was it so important? Could this be why the FBI was so imminent in finding out every detail about Michelle Kline? And is this why she was murdered? The feds were relentless with their questions. They dived in deep, giving me very little chance to breathe, and the tension in the room was way off the charts. Every single answer I gave to each of their questions seemed to have given way to more questions, specifically on my previous answer to fully understand every detail. At one point, I could feel the pressure in my head. The questioning session came to an abrupt end, and I thought I could use the opportunity to throw my questions at the men in suits because I was confused and wanted to know everything as well. Thanks to my session with the feds, I learned that the lady was actually by the name of Michelle Kline and under protection by the FBI in a witness protection program. Apparently, she had been a key witness to a very high-profile case years ago involving the ATF. After joining the program, the feds had faked her death, which was why her fingerprints kept showing my data about her death 20 years ago on the AFIS. But it would seem that the program failed, as she was murdered by someone, and that someone must be who the feds are after. I tried throwing my questions at the US Marshals because I wanted to know more, but they so easily cut me off before I could utter a word, taking my hand in a shake and bidding me farewell. I felt really dumb at that moment. I had some paperwork to complete, which I did and faxed over to the men in suits. After that, I retired to my home where I was completely exhausted and needed to lay my head on something. Monday evening put me in a new spirit and I was feeling much better. I headed out to the station at 1700, attended roll call, and was addressed by Officer 1045, then started my shift. While preparing for the shift mentally, dispatch called in on me. Dispatch to 1034. 1034, go ahead. 1034, we got a call from a senior citizen who is currently at her neighbor's house. She is a medical alert customer and oxygen dependent. Her phone lines are currently not working and are requesting to speak with an officer. 1034, show me en route. This wasn't really a dire case at first sight, and anyone could see why. Still, I had a job to do. It was basically the law to assist where required by a citizen. This trip, however, in the long run, proved to be very useful. I headed out to the scene and was met by an elderly sweet lady who had been experiencing some issues with her landline, and had already called the phone company to handle the issue, but needed an officer as a companion as she was oxygen dependent. I couldn't refuse the offer. Technically, I mean, but I loved the idea of helping out. It caught my attention that she lived in a farmhouse too, which wasn't uncommon as many farmhouses lay around, and she had one of the most colorful and beautiful gardens ever. As we spoke about her garden and more, the phone company technical assistant arrived, and after getting a good understanding of the situation, went over to a long pole with a metal box on it. He pried it open as it seemed untouched for years, and went to work with his tools on them, and I must say, I was pretty intrigued by all this. "What is that?" I asked.
"This is the box that contains her telephone line, as well as her neighbor's lines, to the central telephone system. I'm gonna see if there's a problem with the wires making the connections. These things usually go months, maybe years without being opened and take a little TLC to open. Ah, there we go."
I watched several wires and some labels tagged with labels and codes. "So, explain to me what's going on here?" I asked.
"Well, these boxes were put here way before your time. They had to install these when landlines first became a thing. Do you see these wires and the numbers after them? They show to which address each wire is associated."
I then noticed a free wire hanging from the bottom without a label, unlike the rest. This one appeared to have a female attachment to its end. I asked, "And what is that wire made to connect to?"
"Oh, that's there so we can plug our phones into it and make phone calls and test the lines."
"Wait, what? You can carry a phone in your pocket, plug it in, and make a call from a box? The technician laughed and explained.
Well, it isn't exactly that simple. You need a certain type of phone, but yeah, I guess it's kind of like that.
What phone number would show up when you call someone from a box?
Whichever neighbor's line you selected up here.
As he motioned to the labels and switches, it occurred to me that the farmhouse may have a similar setup, which would explain a lot. Especially why there were a lot of hang-up calls with no suspect. What if my 911 hang-ups at Patch Lane were being done at one of these boxes? I asked, so if a house had no electricity and no telephone, could it still show up as the origin of the phone call if someone called from a box? Stopping for a moment to think about it, the technician replied,
I guess. I mean, that's possible. As long as the telephone line has not been reassigned to another person.
The technician successfully had the phones running again, and we decided to wrap up at the scene. I wasn't just heading back to the station low or going on patrol. I had time on my hands, and a plan. I needed to confirm my theory about the hang-ups from the farmhouse. I got in my cruiser and headed to the farmhouse. As soon as I got there, I jumped out of my cruiser and started scanning the environment in search of a landline telephone box. It didn't take long to find one, but that wasn't what shocked me the most. Opening the old metal box was pretty easy, as though it had been opened before. All of these just confirmed my belief in this case. I started departing from the building when I heard a familiar screech. I turned around and saw the cat from my last visit here on the porch lying back on its side and licking its paw. I moved over to it and saw that the young feline had sustained an injury as its paw was swollen. I couldn't imagine myself just leaving it there, so I took it along with me. I wrapped its paw in soft linen and tried searching the web for the closest vet. I soon came up with one which I remembered from my local childhood. We had a black lab in my family, and every time our dog was needed of medical attention, my dad would always bring him to Dr. Demires for treatment. There were some old fond memories there, so I wasted no time and headed for this vet. I arrived at the vet 20 minutes before closing and felt really bad, but the cat needed his attention immediately. He welcomed us in with a warm smile and proceeded to examine the cat.
So, where did you find this cat, officer?
Down on Patch Lane at an abandoned farmhouse. She was sitting on the front porch crying in pain. I just couldn't leave her there.
Ah, yes. I haven't heard about Patch Lane in quite a while.
Oh, are you familiar with that house? I asked.
I don't know if I would say that. I just remembered the stories that circulated the town way back when.
He stopped to write down some notes on the chart. He looked up and said,
That was a beautiful farm. I remember taking care of the cows on Old Went's farm when the Goods lived there.
Did you know the guy that lived there after the Goods passed?
Oh, I never knew him. I only heard many stories.
What stories?
Well, that fellow was a jack of all trades. You could say he dipped his hands into just about every illegal scheme you could think of. I heard rumors he had ties to the mafia. That guy was blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and yet was supposedly Italian. Now you explain that to me, officer. I never understood it. But I suspect he was giving something or providing something to them. Very odd character.
I never heard about the owner of Patch Lane until just now. Where is he now? I asked.
Oh, he left town quite a few years ago. Never did see him again. Ah, well, anywho. There's some penicillin you're going to have to give Haley for the next 5 days. This will help clear up her abscess and make sure the infection doesn't get any worse. If it does get worse, call my office.
At first, I didn't like where this was going. I could tell that this meant I was about to adopt the cat. And I wasn't really a cat person. I considered a shelter for strays, but once I looked into the cat's cute eyes, her name Haley just slipped out of my mouth without me asking, and the case was sealed. I was bringing home a cat. That night, snuggling with Haley was the best feeling ever. It was Tuesday, and a day off which usually I would take every advantage of and completely drown myself in deep, good, much-needed sleep. But I couldn't get the case of Michelle Kline out of my head. I needed answers. No, I needed someone who had answers. And I knew one person who just might. I arrived at a place of old memories. It was my childhood home. I came to see my dad because he served in the force from the 70s till the 90s. If anyone knew what I didn't know about the farmhouse, he would. As I drove into the apartment, I felt all mushy inside from the memories. A little garden of roses reminded me of my mother who had passed away just a few years back. I walked into the house without asking, and soon was embraced by my dad. As expected, he fed me till I was completely stuffed and went on asking about life and every other detail. Once we had cooled off, I got to the serious information. So, Dad, have you ever been to the house on Patch Lane?
Oh wow, yes I have. Many years ago.
Really? What were you there for?
The ATF needed a couple of uniformed officers to assist them with gathering evidence for a case. They busted the owner of that place for smuggling in illegal guns, and he had them stored in a shed on the farm.
What? I've been researching this place for over a week and I never heard of an ATF raid.
Well, that's because it was confidential. We never wrote a police report on the incident. It was solely documented on the federal level, and they were very good about keeping it out of the media. We didn't have space phones back then, so it was much easier to keep this under wraps.
Do you know what happened to the owner? Who was he?
His name was Joseph? Yeah, Joseph. Joseph Muller, I believe. It was similar to Miller, but not quite Miller.
And what happened to him?
Right, well, he had an outside mole with the police department and caught wind of the raid. He flew the coop, and I never really got an update since then.
I began to wonder why Tim didn't tell me any of this. Dad, I've been dispatched to Patch Lane several times with Tim, and he didn't tell me any of this. Do you know why he wouldn't tell me about it?
Tim was Officer 1045's real name. Well, Tim didn't join the department until about 97, maybe 1998. This all happened around 1995, about 2 years before then.
I felt better knowing Tim didn't know about this. If he had and still chose to keep me in the dark, it would have been much harder to swallow, and I don't know who I could trust. My dad was now branching out onto other topics again, wanting to know all about his daughter's work and whatnot. I went for the door, making up as many excuses as I could fit into one sentence as to why I couldn't stay, and fled. Once clear of my dad, I called the PA State Lab. It had been long enough, but still, they hadn't gotten back to me about what those words on the back of the receipt I retrieved from Michelle Kline's body were. I was received by their receptionist, and transferred. Hello, this is Officer Barkley following up on case number 20181401. I wanted to check the status of my evidence.
Hello, Officer Barkley. Sorry, we've been so busy and I did not get the chance to call you sooner. We were successful in extracting the writing on the back of the receipt you provided to us. It read, L34, R16, L8.
L34, R16, L8. L34, R16, L8. L34, R16, L8. Those words ran through my mind repeatedly as I tried to figure out what it was. I had never heard about it before, but one thing was certain. It was a code to a lock, or maybe a combination to a safe. If it was though, then what was inside this safe? And why was it so important? Could this be why the FBI was so imminent in finding out every detail about Michelle Kline? And is this why she was murdered?